From 1600 to 1947, Britain was a major power in India. The British East India Company created a monopoly over India's trade in the 1600s, establishing several different territories without the consent of the Indian people. It was not until the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857, when Hindu and Muslim British soldiers revolted against the British government's abuse of their religious and cultural beliefs, that the British took direct control of India. Although India was prospering economically during British rule, since trade and agriculture had increased, Indian citizens were feeling increasingly dissatisfied. Even though the Indian Act of 1892 allowed Indian citizens to obtain political positions, the more powerful positions were reserved for the British. Indians felt a lack of representation as well as mistreatment from the British, both of which led to a rise in Indian nationalism. There was a need for major political reform. In reaction to this need for reform, the Indian National Congress was formed in 1883. This was established by government official A. O. Hume, who wished to allow Indians to have a means of expressing their opinions in government. One of the members of this Congress was Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore was a famous poet during the early 1900s in India. He was also awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913. Another member who became the most influential leader of the nationalist movement was Mohandas Gandhi. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on October 2, 1869, in a small town in India. He was married at 13 and studied law at University College in London, England. In South Africa, he was a prominent Indian civil rights leader. He became well known after his efforts to prove to the British that Hindus and Muslims were equal citizens of the British Empire in South Africa. Gandhi conducted many meetings and protests where he incited a rebellion against the British by using non-violent non-cooperation. He suggested burning passes as well as marching and gathering laborers to protest against the abuse of their rights. These actions were a precursor to the revolution against British rule in India. After Gandhi's work on Satyagraha in South Africa, Rabindranath Tagore and Gandhi wanted to meet in order to give a voice to the needs of the Indian citizens. Satyagraha is the journey to find truth. Although the two practiced in completely different fields, they became great friends and discussed the many possible ways that the British could be sent back to Britain. Rabindranath Tagore's writings influenced Gandhi immensely, which he used to incorporate in his journey to seek Satyagraha.
Gandhiji adopted his Satyagraha weapon. Satyagraha is a word holding on to truth. If you suppose that you are not believing in this law or that behavior, so you have to adopt Satyagraha. Satyagraha is the method in which you have to hold truth. And what is truth? If your heart is saying that this is truth, so you have to follow that truth. This is Satyagraha.
The first Satyagraha revolution came about in 1918 in Champaran, a district in the state of Bihar. Thousands of poor farmers were being forced to grow indigo for the British landlords who purchased the crops for a very low price. The British government also imposed a high tax on these farmers and didn't allow them to grow any crops for food, which left them without the necessities for survival. Gandhi used this as a first opportunity for civil resistance. He had heard about an ill-treated worker, and he decided to find out the truth for himself. Upon meeting with the peasants, he discovered that it is no exaggeration, but the literal truth. This was the first successful revolution against British laws in India. Another one of Gandhi's beliefs was Khadi. The Khadi or Swadeshi movement, which began in 1918, was defined as a revolution towards self-reliance by promoting Indian cloth and denouncing imported clothing. He urged Indians to abandon wearing foreign-made cloth and to start weaving their own so that they could free themselves from the most obvious sign of British colonialism. British clothing was a great attraction to many Indians, and they had to purchase it at ridiculously high prices. This was a major contribution to loss of income to businesses and farmers in India. Instead, Gandhi believed that Indians should weave their own cloth, which would bring money back to the Indian economy, resulting in a loss of income for the British clothing industry. Once Gandhi asked Indians to adopt the movement, thousands of bonfires were lighted across the country, and Indians rose up against colonialism by throwing their Manchester textiles into flames. In order for a revolution to take place, India needed to stand united against Britain, but it proved difficult to unite a nation that was so diverse. Many barriers stood between the people, and it would not be possible to bring them together as a nation unless some of these barriers could be removed. Congress decided to pass resolutions to completely remove untouchability in Hindu society. They also addressed the barriers between Hindus and Muslims and aimed to remove these barriers. To gain the backing of Muslims, Gandhi and the Congress supported the Khilafat movement, unity of Muslims. In 1920, the Indian National Congress linked the idea of self-government with the Khilafat demands and adopted non-cooperation to reach both objectives. This proved to be a successful attempt, for this unity could ultimately lead to the fall of the British rule. Another method that Gandhi used were his great periods of fasting, which were known for bringing the country together. He wanted the entire country's participation and cooperation. For example, on May 8, 1933, Gandhi took a 21-day fast in order to address several outbreaks of violence. It was also to enforce the idea of no bloodshed during the revolution against Britain.
Non-violent method was unique because before that, any protests were by and large violent. Gandhi's methodology had great impact because it was founded on truth and personal experience. He did not do anything just theoretically or academically. Whatever he experienced and did in his own life, that influenced his theories.
Man's most essential nutrients are salt and water. These were two things that Gandhi recognized to be tools that could be used in one of his biggest strikes yet. The British Empire had control over the entire Indian economy and controlled many industries, including the salt trade. They had charged a high tax on salt so that they could make great profits. If they did not pay the tax, they would be deprived of one of their essential needs. In reaction to such injustice, on March 12, 1930, Gandhi and his followers marched 240 miles to the sea, where they illegally made salt. He was arrested a month later, but the march had sparked several civil disobedience protests around the country, which eventually shut down many British salt mills. The demonstrations went on for a year until the British government finally reacted and allowed Gandhi, as a representative from the Indian National Congress, to attend the Round Table Conference in London. In March of 1931, Gandhi met with the Viceroy, Lord Irwin, and signed an agreement known as the Gandhi-Irwin Pact. The main issue demand of the British was an end to the civil disobedience movement. The government of India released all Satyagrahis from prison and the agreement was signed. The British government did not, however, yield to the demand of Congress for home rule, but India was being heard at last. Following the last Round Table Conference in London of 1931, Gandhi returned to India and guided his followers to continue to use civil disobedience to fight against the British. By this time, his followers had ignited their own protests against the British. On January 4, 1932, Gandhi was arrested for sedition. During this 2-year period that he was kept in prison, he focused on fasting for the untouchables. A couple years after this incident, the Government of India Act of 1935 was passed. This was the first major step towards India's independence. This allowed Indians to take part in government. The Salt March had a huge negative impact on Britain and their reputation. Nations around the world heard about the extreme use of violence by the British on the Indians. This was usually seen through the press and newspaper. The British were in fact embarrassed at how Indians non-violently responded to their mistreatment of rights. Also, Britain was affected by the recent exhaustion after World War II, which turned out to be a success, but also a tiresome and costly experience for the UK and other countries. After many years, the British finally saw the potential that India would have as its own country and decided that they deserved home rule. Political reform had simply come out because of Satyagraha and has proved to have a lasting influence on the world abroad.